The streets no longer belonged to the living. Batman moved through them with a slow, measured step, each echo of his boots swallowed by fog that seemed to shift with his breathing. The silence was unbearable, a silence that pressed against his skull and hollowed out every thought. He had fought in battlefields filled with screams, endured Gotham's midnight alleys where even silence had an edge. But here, in Silent Hill, it was different. This silence was alive, aware, listening. He felt it in the air, the way the mist clung to him like a shroud, whispering against the cape as though it had a voice of its own. His cowl sensors had long since gone dead, leaving only his instincts to guide him. And those instincts screamed that every step forward was being measured, recorded, fed back into the nightmare around him. The streets bent into shapes that defied logic, corners that folded into one another, alleys that narrowed until they were nearly suffocating. The world wanted him lost. The first apparition appeared in the corner of his vision. At first, Batman ignored it, dismissing it as a trick of the fog. But when the shape did not vanish, when it instead grew clearer with each step, he stopped. Two figures stood in the haze, hand in hand. A man and a woman, blurred but undeniable. The mist parted around them as though giving reverence. And though Batman did not want to admit it, his heart recognized the shapes before his mind could. His parents. They did not move, only stared with hollow eyes that glowed faintly as though lit from within. Their presence radiated not comfort, but accusation, a weight pressing into his chest. The scene was wrong, too tall, too rigid, their outlines warped by something malevolent. Yet he could not look away. Then, without a sound, the figures collapsed into the street like ash in the wind, leaving nothing but the lingering impression of judgment. Batman turned sharply, cape snapping in the mist, forcing himself forward. But the silence followed, thicker, heavier, as though the town had realized which wound to open first. He entered what might once have been a school. The doors swung inward on rusted hinges, and the interior smelled of rot and charred wood. The hallways were lined with lockers, all dented and streaked with dried brown stains that might once have been blood. The floor creaked with each step, the sound unnaturally loud, reverberating through corridors that should not have been this long. And then came the voices. They were faint at first, whispers, threads of sound curling out of the broken PA system above his head. The static shifted into words, warped warped and distorted, but still clear enough to strike. It was his voice, his own voice, speaking confessions he had never made aloud. I wasn't fast enough to save them. I wasn't strong enough to stop him. I wasn't enough. The recordings played on loop, each one unraveling another memory. He gritted his teeth and moved forward, refusing to listen. But the walls began to tremble with the weight of the voices. The words painted across the surfaces in smears of black ink. Each phrase was written in his own handwriting, scrawled over and over until the letters tore through the plaster. At the far end of the hallway, the lockers began to rattle. One by one they burst open, slamming against the walls, and from within spilled paper and fragments of photographs. Each photo was stained, distorted, but the faces were recognizable. His rogues gallery, his allies, the people who had crossed his path in Gotham. And threaded among them were faces of those who had died, their eyes staring back at him with lifeless clarity. A door yawned open, leading into a classroom. The desks were overturned, some nailed into the floor, others clawed at as though desperate hands had tried to escape. On the blackboard, chalk scrawls spelled a single word again and again: failure. In the center of the room stood a single chair, and upon it sat a broken figure. The cape was familiar. The mask was shattered. It was himself, beaten and bloodied, slumped as though awaiting judgment. When Batman approached, the body's head tilted upward, revealing his own face. Eyes hollow, mouth stretched into a soundless scream. The air shifted, and the figure dissolved into dust, carried away by the breath of the fog. The classroom returned to silence, though the word on the blackboard still lingered, etched deeper than chalk could manage. Outside, the town twisted again. The streets formed a new path, leading him into what appeared to be Crime Alley. But it was wrong. The buildings leaned inward, warped at impossible angles. The cobblestones gleamed wet with a black sheen that smelled of rust and old blood. And there, at the far end of the alley, the scene replayed itself. His parents falling, the echo of a gunshot reverberating endlessly against the fog. This time, the shadows did not stay still. His mother lifted her head, eyes like molten glass, and reached out a hand toward him. His father turned slowly, lips moving in a soundless plea. For one moment, the strength of Batman faltered, a crack forming in the armor of his mind. He stepped forward. But then, the ground shifted beneath him, the cobblestones breaking apart into jagged holes that exhaled heat and ash. From these fissures crawled figures not human, not fully formed, parodies of the dead, melted silhouettes that wore the faces of those he had failed. Jason, Barbara, Gordon, Alfred. Each rose from the ground like a nightmare sculpted in flesh, their movements jerky, their bodies broken yet unyielding. They surrounded him without a sound. Their mouths opened in unison, and the fog itself spoke through them. The voices of the lost echoed around him, each phrase weighted with venom. They accused, they begged, they condemned. The assault was not physical. No blade, no gun, no monster lunged for him. Instead, the attack came as a crushing tide of memory, each figure replaying the moment of their death or suffering over and over, their hollow eyes demanding why he had failed them. Each accusation was a hook, dragging him deeper into despair, his will strained against the weight of it. He dropped to one knee, cape folding around him, as the fog thickened until it threatened to bury him whole. The apparitions moved closer, their hands stretching toward him, not to harm, but to bind. Chains of guilt and regret woven into flesh. He could feel it, the pressure, the temptation to surrender, to let the weight of his past bury him in this place. But beneath the agony, Batman's resolve ignited. He forced himself upward, fists clenched, eyes narrowed into the void. The fog recoiled for a moment, as though surprised at his defiance. The figures flickered, their forms destabilizing, but they did not vanish. Instead, they retreated into the mist, their whispers trailing after him like chains still hooked to his soul. The silence returned, but it was not empty. Batman understood now. Silent Hill had shown him its weapon. The cult did not need blades or fire. They only needed his memories, his failures, his ghosts. By twisting them into chains, they could weaken him, soften him, prepare him to become their vessel. And somewhere beyond the fog, deeper in the labyrinth of the town, something waited with a smile, something that already knew his name.